inclusive school policies. Number one, whenever I have these things, people often assume that they know what is what, but I like to start with definitions because I think definitions are important for us to really understand what we're talking about. Like we talked yesterday about values, and maybe one value means one thing to me and another thing to you. We always must come to an agreement about terms that we use so that we know what we are actually talking about. So I'll start you off with a possible definition. So we could think of some different definitions. This is the definition I like to use. So school policy is any set of principles, rules, measures, and guidelines formulated and adopted by a school to reach its long-term goals or to address a particular issue or challenge that the school is facing. School policies are always within the bound of national education policies, but are contextualized for the needs of the school and its particular circumstances. So I think if you were to think about what are the key words here, on one hand, it's this, so it's a policy, so it's a rule, a measure, a guideline. It is adopted by the school, but it is within the bounds of national education policies. So school policies cannot go beyond some circumstances. What I find very interesting when I work with schools, and I'm sure you've had this experience or you will have it when you start working with schools, is that schools always are in doubt about their autonomy. And often you hear that these are things we cannot do, this should be given to us by the ministry, the agency, somebody else. But there are always spaces for which we have autonomy. And number one rule that I also like to say is that we cannot say that we don't have autonomy until we reach out our hands and touch the walls. So while I'm here, this is only, but maybe I have some space here and there are things that I can decide that I'm not aware of. The other thing that is important is that people, when you talk about policies, they automatically think about national policies, although we do have very many policies in our lives that are not laws, regulations, and so on. Even in your family, you probably have some policies. A policy might be, and they're usually unwritten. Some families might even have some written policies, but it's, what is our way of doing things, which is set. So who cleans the table after dinner? How do we spend our weekends? I mean, we could have a lot of policies that we don't even think about. Schools have policies, whether they're aware of them or not aware of them. It is much better if these school policies are really thought through and agreed upon, because that makes it clear to everybody. But before we go further, and I will try to see if I can see the chat at the same time while I'm having the presentation, and I'm not sure. I'd have to exit the screen, I guess, which is too much. But maybe you can tell me some examples. When I say school policy, what are the things that you think of? What could be a policy?
School development plans.
School development plans, Rosetta, thank you. Anybody? Yeah. This is.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Elda. Did you want to add another one?
No, school policy related discrimination or bullying stop, designed and adopted by school themselves based on their needs.
Based on their needs, exactly. So school development plan is a very typical school policy. And now we will talk about school development plans later today. And then you said, yes, any kind of policies on discrimination, bullying. What else could be a school policy? Anybody?
For example, regulation of how to deal with school abandonment.
Dropout.
Or the dropout.
Dropout
or the risk of dropping out.
So you could have special policies that prevent dropout and abstinence from school. So you don't want kids to miss too many classes because that might lead into some issues. What else could be a school policy? Anybody?
or something related to school, inner school structure to be more effective, like a parent council, student council, and teacher council, maybe.
Usually, as you said, Rosetta, and this is a very good example. Sorry, Elda. When we have a national policy that says that every school must have a student council and every school must have a teacher council and a parent council, these are national policies. But how we implement them at school level, what is our procedure for electing? If it's not prescribed in national policy, then we prescribe them and they become school policies. So yes, many different types of school policies. It could be guidelines for assessment of students.
Yeah, classroom rules or regulations.
Yeah, and then you can even lower school policies to the level of the classroom. And then they would be classroom policies, although we would call them classroom rules. But basically, this is what a policy is. It's nothing more or nothing else. It's the way that we have all agreed to behave and how we do things. Basically,
we will talk later about one school policy. It is about cooperation with parents.
Excellent, Mohamed. So this is a very interesting policy, which is also a policy. We think that things happen just by themselves, but actually, yes, school policies help us to do what we want to do.
If we have school policy, everything is easier.
Yeah,
and to make any connection, any moves and everything.
Absolutely. So if we're moving somewhere, if we have school policies, then it's much easier. Rosetta, you wanted to say one more thing?
Just in line with what the other colleague person said.
We don't hear you, Rosetta.
Community, school, family, and community partnership programs or plans in the school, which are in line with the school development program and regulations on. So this is something that can lead and guide the whole work toward involving parents and strengthening cooperation with families and community.
Thank you so much for giving us all this input, because actually, when you look at what you talked about, it's kind of a definition of inclusive school policy. So inclusive policies provide explicit aims for promoting inclusion. So when you talk about anti-bullying, this is part of any kind of inclusive. So safe environments for children are part of inclusion. When you talk about outreach to community and parents, it's also about inclusion. So it's promoting inclusion in plans and other policy documents. It focuses on the policies towards admission and accessibility of the organization. So it could be about the building itself, but it could be about also what we do when a new child enters school. Do we have procedures for this? So we have a new student. How do we act when we have a new student? Do we introduce him only to his class? Does he go for a round of school to see the whole building? That's also a policy. Or you could have some kinds of bigger situation. And if you look at the migrant movements that we had in our region, at one point we had many students entering classrooms or schools. And did we have a policy for that? And in Serbia, actually, they made it kind of almost a national policy, because it was part of the schools who were accepting migrants had some kind of procedure on what they do when they have these large numbers of students coming in. So that's also a policy. It's about also how we recruit staff and students, and on the policies, the organization or the school has developed to organize the support for diversity and the celebration of diversity. And those are policies that ensure safety and well-being of all. So basically, that is very simple. The next slide for me was going to be about examples for inclusive school policies, but I think we've mentioned already a few as we were mentioning school policies in general. And if somebody just wants to now thought of something that would really be inclusive school policy and that you really want to tell us about, you have an opportunity now.
I think we haven't mentioned policies concerning professional development of teachers, which is very important in the context of inclusive education.
So do we have policies on how teachers go for professional development? Who decides who wants to go or who decides who goes? Is it the teacher by themselves expressing the need? Who needs to approve this? So you could have policies on that, which are beyond what the national policies say. So the national policy might say that teachers have to have, I don't know, 10 hours a year of continuous professional development. But your school might decide that actually they want to be 15. And the national policy is not going to say no. They might say no to 8 because this is not the standard they want, but the school can make it extra. And yes, you're right, Tiana. Generally, code of ethics for teachers could be a school policy. But also professional development is a big part of school policies. Some useful hints, and this is something that we come across when we have set national rules for school policies. For example, when SDP becomes, so school development plans is part of the system and every school must have it, or suddenly we have, every school has to have an anti-bullying or anti-discrimination and so on. And often what happens is that there is a lot of this copy-pasting of policies across schools because schools don't get the know-how. They're not really empowered for these policies. So we need to really work with schools in order for them to do this. But copying or using other school policies for your school often has no positive effect on the school, as the effective school policies are those created in a participatory engagement of school stakeholders and for the specific context of each school. And although this policy might work in school A, the effect of it in school B will be much less, especially if it was not co-created by the stakeholders in the school. Because co-creation actually gives you the feeling of, missing a word, that it's part of you, that I can't think of a word, but it will come to me.
Authorship and belonging too.
Yes, authorship. So this kind of idea that this, I have co-created this, therefore I will also implement it with much more vigor and efficiency.
Commitment to the goals.
Yes,
maybe, yeah.
yes. And then school policies are to be implemented by the whole school. Otherwise, they're not really, again, effective. All stakeholders should be involved in developing and formulating the policies and not only the school administration. And this is similar if we look at any kind of policies on national level. When the ministry passes a new regulation by themselves as an order, often we feel like that's not fair because they don't know the situation on the ground. It's not easy for us. And often it is not in the context of the school and what schools can really do. And the same is at the school level. If the school administration passes a regulation without consulting at least consulting with the stakeholders, then it will not be that effective. And then the most important one, like nothing in life is permanent, neither are school policies. Circumstances change. One fact about schools is that school changes every single year. If nothing else, you get new students every year. And these new students bring something new. These students come with families and parents who are then new to the school. So nothing is permanent in school, and neither should be the school policies. So if nothing else changes, the new students come, but often other circumstances might change. And there is a need to adapt policies regularly. Policies should be reviewed and redrafted at least biannually. Although for most of the things, we suggest an annual review. So at least biannually. And even if you have the best anti-bullying policy in your school, go look at it. See if the places of bullying are still the same, or if something changed, if bullying is now occurring somewhere else in school. What can we do about this? So reviewing policies is just as much, is just as important as formulating them in the first place. So what I would say is that if you start with participatory policy formulation, and go into inclusive policy development, chances of you having an inclusive school are much greater. And of course, it's not the only thing that we need to worry about in order to have inclusive schools. There are many other factors, but school policies are definitely a part of it. And then we come to the main steps of policy formulation process. And if you look at that, and then you look at how we are going to do the school development plan, or when Ivona talked yesterday about indicators and goals, in the end, we come to more or less same steps. We first need to know where we are. So we need to gather data. So what is happening in our school? What is the challenge? We might know the problem, but we don't know where the problem comes from. Then this part of soliciting ideas, this is where we go into asking all our stakeholders what they would do about it, drafting a policy. This doesn't have to be done by everybody in school. You draft a policy, of course, a team of people or even one person can draft it. But then this consultation process with stakeholders, reviewing the draft, and if you do consultation, the worst thing you can do is not to respond. So for example, you ask your students what they would do about a certain thing, and they tell you, and you think, well, actually, it's a really bad idea, but you don't say anything, and you don't put it in the new draft. That makes students feel like they shouldn't have been asked at all. So even if you don't accept all the ideas, which is fine, we cannot accept every single idea we get, it is very important to give feedback to those who have provided input. So we could tell students, unfortunately, this year, we cannot implement this idea because of this and this, but thank you. Or you can explain with other ways. But the worst thing is, once you consult, you have to respond, either by accepting, by negotiating with them how this could be, or by saying no, but for the reason this and that. And then finally, we do the final draft and the adaptation of policy. So it's like any process, I would say, where we do regulations. But stakeholders. So who are our stakeholders? We use this word all the time. So who are our main stakeholders? Who would like to tell me?
Teacher, parents, students, community members.
Teachers, parents, students.
Professional associate.
Professional staff.
Health centers.
Okay, so whenever I talk about this, number one for me, or A in this case, is students. They're our main stakeholders. We start usually with teachers, and that's okay, because we are used to this, and they are the ones who in the end probably make more decisions, but it's students who are our main stakeholder. So in a way, we should really be talking to the students first. Teacher and all other school staff. And when I say all other school staff, I mean not only the professional staff that Vicky mentioned, but also teacher assistants. Who else is in school?
The guard.
The guards in
The social service unit.
Social services.
For example, psychologists or social workers.
Yeah, or we call them professional staff in our context, but yes, all of those. But also we have people like janitors, cooks, cleaners.
Cleaners, yeah.
And different people in the school who maybe a gardener, I don't know, depending on how the school looks. So when we say all other school staff, we really do mean other school staff, because this is also their institution and they live in it. And they can help us implement some policies. And they can give us good hints about what's happening in school, actually. So not to forget all other school staff, parents, communities, of course, but school administration. We shouldn't forget about school administration. So you might have a secretary, you might have a financial person, but of course also the school head, the school leader, and so on. And then the school board, which in most countries exists. It could be different combinations. It could be a combination of parents and teachers. It could be a combination of community parents, teachers. Sometimes it's a combination of political people from the local community. So whoever, but school board is also part of it. And I'm already kind of running out of time, but this is something that we also forget about, the levels of participation that we have and where do we want to go. And if this was a workshop, then I would give you a time to think about and tell me for each stakeholder at which level of participation you think they are in your system. And if you remember, we had this soliciting ideas. So soliciting ideas is the first level of participation. So it's voluntary or other forms of input to anything. So this is contribution. So I give you my idea. The second level is information sharing, where everybody is informed about everything. This is also crucial. So if we bring a policy, then everybody should know about it, be part of formulating it, but also they should be informed. So here's all stakeholders are informed about their rights, responsibility, options, rules, and so on. So in the consultation phase, this is where we give the opportunity to stakeholders to look at the drafted policy and to provide feedback. They can provide recommendations, suggestions, concerns, maybe give us some new input on analysis and so on. And here there is no assurance that their input will be used, but it is a consultation phase. Then we have the next phase, which is our next level of participation, cooperation, and consensus building, where here we negotiate position and help determine what our priorities are, but the process is still directed by the higher powers, let's call them that for this thing. Decision making, in which the stakeholders have a role in making decisions on either policy, project design, implementation. Partnership with stakeholders, work together as equals towards mutual goal, and the highest level of participation is empowerment. Although in many ways, I'm sorry, I went too far. In many ways, we want to be at the level of empowerment. We rarely get there. In empowerment, what we actually do is we transfer control over decision-making and the resources to the stakeholders. And this is the final level of participation. So empowerment, as I said, rarely happens at school level, but we could discuss when it could happen, why it would be good, and it would be really good for your analysis to try thinking about, in my system, in my school, when I work with schools, where are these levels of participation and which stakeholder is which, because it helps us understand how we can build further. And then some indicators that policies are inclusive, and we'll then discuss this a little bit further when we do school development plans. Are there clear policies and procedures for the cases of any kind of violence, harassment, and discrimination? Do the school policies reflect values and principles of inclusiveness and social justice? What about school procedures such as assessment, grading, learning opportunities? Is there a clear anti-discrimination policy there? Another one which is important, this parent council and student council, are they actively involved in decision-making and policy development? Do we have code of ethics? So there could be many, many indicators of how you decide to self-evaluate your school and say, we have inclusive school policies or we don't.